Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whichever time of day you chose to tune in and listen to my research project. Today I'll be discussing a 2025 research article that presents a novel approach to protecting critical infrastructure systems from intelligent adversaries. The article is titled Attack Defense Game Modeling Framework from a Vulnerability Perspective to a um, Protect Critical Infrastructure Systems was published by Wu, Go, Wang, and Zhao in Reliability Engineering and System Safety. The Critical Infrastructure Protection Challenge. Critical infrastructure systems face an evolving threat landscape that traditional risk analysis methods struggle to address effectively. Traditional approaches model threats as random, stochastic events, treating attacks like natural disasters that occur with certain probabilities. However, this assumption is fundamentally flawed when dealing with intelligent adversaries. Real world rational Real world attackers are rational agents who observe defensive measures, learn from their environment, and adaptively modify their strategies. They identify vulnerabilities, exploit weaknesses in defense postures, and optimize their attacks based on defender response. This adaptive intelligence creates a significant gap in our current risk analysis methodologies, leaving critical infrastructure vulnerable to strategic, targeted attacks rather than random events. Research, objectives, and novel contributions. Wu and his colleagues developed a Stackelberg attack defense game model specifically designed to address the limitations of traditional stochastic approaches. The research has three primary objectives. First, they modeled the strategic interaction between an intelligent, adaptive attacker and resource-constrained defender using game theory. Second, they incorporate what's known as CPT theory, cumulative prospect theory, into the payoff structure, accounting for how both attackers and defenders make decisions under uncertainty. Third, they develop a vulnerability-based framework that characterizes cascading failures in complex interdependent framework systems. These contributions address significant gaps in the existing literature on the infrastructure protection. System overview diagram. This diagram summarizes the essence of a attack defense game framework. At the top, we have two key players, the attacker who is intelligent and the adaptive with risk preferences modeled by CPT, and the defender who is resource constrained but also has CPT risk preferences. The defender moves first by allocating resources. The attacker observes these defensive actions and responds strategically. Both players interact with the critical infrastructure network in the center, which includes power grids, water systems, and communications, all interdependent nodes with cascading failure as a potential. Through vulnerability assessment and Stackelberg equilibrium analysis, the framework produces three key outputs: optimal strategies for both players, efficient resource allocation, and ultimately a 41% reduction in system losses compared to the heuristic methods. Game theoretical framework foundations. The Stackelberg game model represents a leader-follower method dynamic that mirrors real-world defense scenarios. In this framework, the defender acts as the leader, making the first move by allocating limited resources to protect critical nodes within the infrastructure network. The attacker, acting as the follower, observes the defensive strategy and then optimally responds by selecting which components to target. This sequential structure is crucial because it reflects operational reality. Defenders implement security measures visibly, and intelligent attackers conduct reconnaissance assesses these defenses, and then chooses their attack vectors accordingly. The game seeks what's known as equilibrium, a state where neither player can improve their outcomes by unilaterally changing strategy. Cumulative prospect theory integration. One of the most significant innovations in this research is the integration of cumulative prospect theory into game theoretic model. Traditional expected utility theory assumes that the decision makers are perfectly rational and risk neutral. However, CPT, developed by Kaman and Tversky, provides a more psychologically realistic model of decision making under uncertainty. The theory incorporates several key behavior characteristics, such as reference-dependent evaluation, loss aversion, where losses loom larger than equivalent gains, and subjective probability weighing. In infrastructure protection, this means attackers facing likely failure might take greater risks for chances at success, while defenders protecting high-value assets might over-invest in protection when the probability weighted expected loss is moderate. This psychological realism is significantly improves the model's predictive accuracy. Vulnerability assessment methodology. The vulnerability assessment component evaluates how local component failures cascade through interconnected infrastructure systems. The methodology characterizes functional vulnerability by analyzing network topology, component dependencies, and failure propagation pathways. When a component fails, the model traces how the failure affects dependent components, potentially triggering a cascading failures throughout the system. This is particularly critical for modern infrastructure which consists of highly interconnected systems. Power grids depend on communication networks. Water treatment facilities require electricity. Transportation systems rely on both. Components with high betweenness centrally, those that lie on many critical paths through the network receive special attention because their compromise can partition all network and isolate large segments of the infrastructure. Optimal resource allocation strategy. Given vulnerability assessments and game theoretic analysis, the framework determines optimal defensive resource allocation. Defenders face a classical optimization problem. Limited security resources must be distributed across numerous potential targets to minimize expected losses from strategic attacks. The framework considers multiple factors simultaneously. The inherent value of each component is topographical is typological importance in the network. The cascading effects its failure would trigger risk pref the attacker's likely risks preference and the resource cost of defending each potential target. Importantly, the framework doesn't simply defend the most valuable assets, it defends the assets that considering the attacker's rational response, providing the greatest reduction in expected system-wide losses. Case study demonstration and results. Wu and his colleagues demonstrated their framework through a case study of interdependent infrastructure systems comprising power, water, and communication networks. The case study compared these approaches, the novel CPT-based Stackelberg game model, the traditional expected utility game model, and a heuristic approach that simply defends the highest value components. Results showed that the CPT-based approach significantly outperformed alternatives when facing an intelligent, adaptive attacker. The CPT model reduced expected system losses by 23% compared to the traditional utility-based games, and by 41% when compared to the heuristic defenses. The performance advantage stems from accurately modeling risk preferences and identifying non-obvious critical nodes whose protection prevents cascading failures. Key assumptions in the framework. Like all models, this framework relies on several key assumptions that are necessary for its mathematical formulation. First, attacker rationality. The model assumes attackers are intelligent, goal-seeking agents who optimize their strategies based on observable defender actions. Second, complete information. Both parties have full knowledge of system typology, component values, and risk preferences. Third, observational defense actions. Defenders' resource allocation decisions are visible to the attacker after deployment. Fourth, measurable cascading effects. Vulnerability and cascading of failures effects can be accurately quantified through network analysis. These assumptions, while necessary for the model, also point to areas where future research could enhance realism. Limitations and open challenges. Despite its contributions, this research has several limitations that suggest directions for future work. First, high computational complexity. The optimization becomes intractable for very large networks with thousands of nodes. Second, data availability requirements. The model requires detailed attacker behavior data that may be difficult to obtain in practice. Third, irrational attacker behavior. Model accuracy deteriorates if attackers act rationally. Ideologically motivated attackers may defy game theoretic predictions. Fourth, single period static analysis. The current model does not capture dynamic learning or evolving threats over time. These limitations represent important opportunities for extending this research. Human factors and threatening effectiveness. Even mathematically optimal strategies can fail if human decision makers don't implement them correctly. Several human factors threaten the effectiveness of this framework. One, overconfidence in defenses. Defenders may overestimate security measures effectiveness, reducing investment and redundancy. Second, biased threat perception. Decision makers may focus on familiar threats while ignoring novel attack vectors, misallocating scarce resources. Three, slow interagency coordination. Most stakeholders may fail to share information or align strategies, increasing vulnerability windows. Four, budget and political pressures. Short-term pressures may override optimal long-term security strategies, leading to suboptimal resource allocation. The key insight here is that human factors must be considered alongside technical solutions. Outcomes and recommendation. Let me summarize the key outcomes, lessons learned, and recommendations from this research. The key outcome is that CPT-based game model achieved 41% reduction in expected losses compared to the heuristic methods and 23% improvement over traditional expected utility approaches. The lessons learned are threefold: treating attackers as intelligent agents produces better defenses than stochastic models. Behavioral realism through CPT significantly improves predictive accuracy, and system level vulnerability analysis reveals that non-obvious critical nodes. For practitioners, I recommend adopting game theoretic frameworks when facing intelligent adversaries, incorporating behavioral decisions or decision theory into threat assessments, prioritizing network critical nodes rather than just high value assets, and analyzing cascading failures potential when allocating security resources. The bottom line is that this framework moves infrastructure protection from reactive thinking towards proactive, system level strategic planning. These are the references for my presentation. Thank you for your time again. I know it was a little over 10 minutes, but I appreciate you tuning in and you know, listening. I hope you guys got something from this. I know it's more defense, attack, military based, but appreciate your time.